Thanks, Lori. I'm only going to say some introductions and then turn it over to Steve, and he's got the content and the presentation to deliver. So we'll be happy to share this and take some questions at the end.
So Tyler, I was hoping you'd say, let's just continue on with those movie quotes, because that was a blast. That was so fun.
That was a lot of fun. I can't
That's
type
awesome.
fast enough to be competitive, but it was fun to watch.
Okay, so hopefully you guys are seeing my screen. My name is Steve Mulberry, and as you know, Tyler's with me today, and we're going to kind of share some strategies and lessons that we've learned from helping our customers adopt utility networks, specifically for the water utilities. And I thought the best way to kind of do this was kind of break it up into kind of 3 categories. So I'm going to walk through some things that you need to know, maybe before you get started, or just some nuances with the utility network, some benefits you receive, and then what you need to do, maybe to get started or to actually start your migration process or adoption process. So these are sort of the groups I'm going to talk to. So let's get started with what you need to know. And I want to start off with the actual foundation, right? What's required to get started when we're talking about the utility network? Again, specifically for the water solutions, and they have this thing called the Water Solution Foundation. And there's sort of 2 sides to the house here. On one side, there's this enterprise approach where you need to deploy an ArcGIS enterprise environment. You use ArcGIS Desktop Pro, and you install the utility network management tools and applications. It's very client-managed environment. It's highly customizable. We get the ability to use versioning. You may have heard of a term called branch versioning. We'll talk about that some. So you have multiple people editing a localized schema. And we see this as fitting sort of that mid to large size utility environment there. So this is the enterprise approach, where we're going to use an enterprise geodatabase. So this is sort of one side of the house. But as we realize that there's an other side of the camp, folks that just want to get started, they want to learn, and want to kind of understand what it's going to take to get started. So there's this simple hosted feature services, and they call this the Water Distribution System Foundation, where it's a very fast startup for a small organization. Things like ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Pro is all you need to get started. It can deploy literally in minutes. You use ArcGIS Pro to deploy the solution right to your ArcGIS Online environment. It is a simple features only. So you're talking about simple feature editing capability. There's no network capabilities in there, no versioning. You still get to use ArcGIS Pro for that precision edits and the topological relationships and things like that. But it's really meant to be for you to get started, to get familiar with the schema, the framework, the tools, the editing capabilities, and things like that. And there's also a file geodatabase option that you can use, so sort of that personal project approach. And I want to show you here real quick. I'm going to bring up a web browser. I'll show you real quick what that looks like. So once you deploy this solution to your ArcGIS Online, you'll get a series of hosted feature layers, some web maps, some web applications that really build out this infrastructure. It's all the elements that you need to get started. And once you get that up and in place, you can open the web map and start editing and adding features and learning what's available and how to work with the different features. You can see the hydrants and the fittings and the sewer connections, whatever I want to use. And I don't have to use all of it. I can use part of this schema just to get up and running and get started. And then there's also some applications that get deployed as well. So simple viewer type applications where I can use the information as I'm editing, doing online editing. And what's really nice about this is that I can use ArcGIS Pro to edit these feature services, because that's exactly what the UN is all about. It's a service-oriented architecture. So I can actually use ArcGIS Pro to edit these hosted feature services sitting inside ArcGIS Online. So as you get ready to look at migrating and looking to adopt the UN, know that there's 2 sides to this house. And you can get up and running very quickly with the Water Distribution System Foundation. And if you need any help at all, we have jump starts that we can help jumpstart you in either the enterprise side or the simple hosted feature side. So with that, let's dive a little bit deeper in there and talk a little bit more about what's needed to get required. So let's let's start off with Pro. So you need to have at least ArcGIS Pro 2.4 standard or advanced with the UN add-in tools. I know that Pro is now up to like 2.6.2 or something like that. You have to have at least 2.4. You have to have ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7.1. Now, Esri says that it does support 10.6.1, but we find the integration much more cleaner if you start at 10.7.1. Again, standard or advanced, that's fine. ArcGIS server must be federated with Portal. And there is a utility network license and an extension. Now, starting at 10.8, Esri introduced this new thing called a UN user type extension, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So that's not required. The traditional licensing isn't required moving beyond 10.8. And then from the database side, it's your traditional enterprise geodatabase, whether that's SQL Server or Oracle, Postgres. It doesn't matter. And what I want to kind of point out here with this slide is that you can kind of see the things that are going on here, right? ArcGIS Pro has been out for what, 6 years now, over 6 years. ArcGIS Enterprise, more than that. The Enterprise Geodatabase, even more than that. And right now, this whole utility network foundation is at version 3.4. So holistically, all these components together have been around for a long time. So you can kind of be confident and assured that it's a very stable environment to use to get up and running. So let's talk about this new user type extension. What does that really mean? So Esri has introduced this starting at 10.8, and it's a way to allow Esri to extend what users can do by providing access to very specific functionality with specific applications at the REST endpoint. Because they're going to start introducing this service-oriented architecture, and the UN is one of the first ones to get that. So starting at ArcGIS Enterprise 10.8, the way you enforce authentication is through now this user type extension. And you're probably familiar with this because it's also available at the Parcel Fabric level too. So Esri has released these two service-oriented architecture approaches, one for the UN and one for Parcel Fabric. So what does this look like on the back end? Once you implement this user type extension, how do you enforce authentication? So let's dive a little bit deeper here. So this is what it looks like once you deploy the utility network services, and here's the examples for Naperville Electric. And the two services there in orange are the ones that are using that new user type extension. So those are the ones that are locked down. Everything else that's associated with those services are wide open. And again, we access these services through the REST endpoint. So ArcGIS Pro becomes a client through REST endpoint to ArcGIS Enterprise and these new services. So how does this user type extension affect our named users? So let's look at that real quick. So we should be familiar with some of these named users from viewer all the way over to what's new with 10.8 is the storyteller user type. And the Insights one was released, I think, back in 10.7 versions. But it doesn't matter what user type you have. If you want to just view and query and look at those utility network services, it's accessible throughout all the user types. You don't have to worry about that at all. But if you need to have additional access to those two services that are locked down, then that's where you apply the service, that new user type extension. That's where that's enforced at. So you can see across the board there, if I want to give viewer additional capabilities, will I give them access to that new user type extension? All the way up, except for at the professional level, you can see that it's included with a standard or advanced, but you kind of see how that kind of plays out. So it's free and it's available for all users to view and query and kind of visualize the information. But if I want to go deeper, then I just enforce it with that user type extension there. Okay, so let's kind of move on to the benefits and what you receive through benefits from implementing the utility network. Let's start off with field mobility, right? You get this ability to have connected and disconnected and native applications, web applications, both outdoors and indoors. You get the ability to have a cross-platform integration, so having access to any device, anywhere, anytime, desktop and tablet, and being able to access those geoprocessing services and tools, again, no matter what device you're running on. Because remember, it's all about this service-oriented architecture. So we get this modernized architecture approach for sharing and using and collaborating with the information. ArcGIS Pro was used here, which is a 64-bit product that leverages that technology that allows us to really get the quick performance and agile editing capabilities within the platform. You get improved asset representation. So this concept of a high fidelity data model, right? Looking at connectivity and asset directionality and terminals and containments, associations, all those are embedded in this improved asset representation. And to be honest, as we spend a lot of time, years, honing in on this data model and schema and the tools there. So it's really the future of how Esri is going to allow us to work and manage the utility networks. And I don't know if you've noticed over here on the right, but these little graphics here are ArcGIS Pro running in a web browser. So now with that capability of having a thin client, ArcGIS Pro can really run and sit anywhere because we're hitting REST endpoints for all the information. So lots of benefits that you get from leveraging the utility network, from field mobility all the way down to the improved asset representation there. So let's move into some of the things that you need to do to get started, or some of the things you can do just to start leveraging the utility network. We kind of like to break this down into sort of this plan that we've kind of evolved around. We've been doing this for a number of years. We've started off when it was in beta. We have a team of folks internally that have been working with the water folks at Esri to kind of beta test this process and help move this thing along. And as we have helped our customers adopt the utility network, we've come up with this plan where we start off with this readiness assessment that helps sort of guide us through this whole utility network implementation and management process. And I want to dive deeper into that part first. And when we talk about getting ready, right, trying to look at this, because this is something that you definitely want to take your time. You want to thoughtfully think this thing through, plan this out, and do the proper preparation before you just jump into the UN. And one thing that we found that really helps organization is to develop a very specific utility network working group that you guys can meet often. You can discuss where you're at in the strategy, how you're going to do the implementation, the training, the software, the schedule for rolling these things out, and all those things that kind of impact that whole process. But once you kind of get that in place, then you're going to kind of walk through these readiness assessments where you're going to have a planning meeting where you organize your workflow. You're going to look at the infrastructure and identify what needs to change, if anything. We talked about the versions there. We want to talk about staff. What kind of training do we need to have, or additional resources do we need to put in place in order to support this migration and this adoption? We want to look at the data. We're going to spend a lot of time on data. We want to start that review process immediately within this readiness assessment step. We want to look at the editing workflows. This is definitely going to change as you move into coming from an ArcMap perspective to the ArcGIS Pro environment, and the new schema changes there. Again, the desktop competencies, right? Do we have ArcGIS Pro users? Are they familiar with the new interface? Do they need training? Those kinds of things. And then with all this in place, then we kind of roadmap or build this execution model that's going to allow us to take us through the next steps. And I'm going to kind of walk you through these next steps. So the next one would be data cleansing. We're going to spend a lot of time here, but what's important to know is that we don't have to have everything clean. It doesn't have to be a perfect model for us to get started. We can put in checks and balances that allow us to have an evolution of getting our data to the spot where it needs to be. It doesn't need to be perfect right off the bat, but we do need to identify some key attributes. We want to work through some of our source errors. If you haven't ever used Data Reviewer, that'll become your best friend. The Data Reviewer is what we use a lot to work through these data cleansing processes. And once we got a grasp on the data side of this, looking at what you're using now and how you're gonna crosswalk that over to the new utility network schema, then we can move on to the platform implementation. And one thing that we found out that works very well is that we've teamed up with a company called SSP. They have a product called GISinc. In every case that we've helped our clients move over, we've stayed in both versions. We've kept the geometric network running while we're moving into the new utility network. And this SSP sync allows us to keep those two environments synchronized with all of our data edits along the way. So we don't have to lose anything or have to do a big catch up once we go and cycle over to the new platform. So we recommend SSP sync in this process. There's going to be other tools that you're going to use, like the data loading tools that are provided by Esri. This is where we're going to create our development environment to do all of our testing in. We're going to build this environment out because we know that the utility network is resource intensive. So we want to make sure that we architect out the right development environment so we can do the proper testing, make sure we get the right versions in place there. If we're doing anything other than water, maybe sewer or storm, again, we want to make sure we have the right versions in place. We want to make sure we have that user type extension deployed, especially if we're moving into the 10.8 versioning. We're going to make sure that we're working through any field collection processes. Right now, Collector doesn't support branch versioning. It's being worked on, but we also probably heard about this new solution coming out called field maps, RTS field maps, which is going to be a nice addition to field editing and field collection inside the utility network. It's going to be a great addition there. So we kind of work through these platform implementation processes. We move into the migration planning where we're doing our testing, we're correcting, and we're getting user feedback. We're communicating this information with that UN working group, working together to kind of walk through this whole process. We're finishing up our crosswalks with all of our data mapping. We're still using that development environment. We're deploying best patterns for sharing information through our user types. So we want to make sure that you're using the right user type for the right functionality, whether it's a viewer or a field editor or a creator, those kinds of users. Make sure that we're implementing and we have the right licenses in place. We're introducing users to this new network within Pro, right? So if they're not familiar with Pro yet, we got to make sure that Pro gets in front of them. They're starting to leverage that environment and planning for that rollover. And then we're planning. This is where we start to plan for our editing downtime. When are we going to cut over from our old way of doing things to the new way of doing things? And we're communicating this again throughout the process with our UN working group and looking for possible training opportunities, especially in desktop, using ArcGIS Pro to get people familiar and comfortable with that environment. And then from there, we move into the integration planning. So we see this at this point in time, we're going to ensure that all the integration concerns are addressed. We should have, through the readiness assessment and the data and the platform migration, we should have addressed everything. Our working group should be totally in sync with all that we're doing, the timelines, the execution plans, things like that. We've gone through our ArcGIS Pro testing. We've worked through this branch versioning concept, which gives us the ability to have REST endpoints to the services. Branch versioning extends the ability for us to expose this data through REST endpoints. We're familiar with the editing process. We've deployed all those web applications to our deployment environment, our development environment. We've tested those out. And then we've approached and we've addressed any third-party business systems that we may need to address. So what is going to be affected by moving to the UN? Right? What other business systems that we need to make sure that we test, we document, and we make sure are working before we do a full-blown cutover. And then we move into the implementation plan. So a testing phase is over. We're scheduling our data freeze, right? We're going to not do any more editing in the environment. We're going to begin with the Pro desktop users, get them established in a production environment. We're going to test all our connections to Portal, create our versions, get those folks working in there, repoint all of our web maps and applications, follow the steps that we developed and we took during the testing phase, just move them right over to production. And then we're going to address any remaining errors and cleaning. Again, remember, you don't have to have a perfect schema and all the data converted at once, as long as you have that plan in place and when things can move over and how they're going to move over. Right? We address those remaining errors. And then finally, and I put this at the last step here, but this should go on throughout every process, because making this kind of a change could be scary to some folks, having to use a new tool, new way of accessing things, new solutions, new applications. right? Our working group maintains that advocacy throughout the entire organization. We continue that education and outreach, and we look for other ways to make sure that we bring the folks along with us along this way. We just don't want to say, hey, tomorrow you're going to use ArcGIS Pro and this is how you're going to do things. We want to make sure that everybody's ready to go and very familiar with this whole environment before we just pull the plug on them. And remember, use that SSP sync, because that can keep you in sync with both sides of the house until you're ready to make that final cutover. So let's kind of do a quick review here. So we talked about the things you need to know, from platform requirements to licensing to that infrastructure, right? What versions you need to have in place at a minimum, when that new user type extension was introduced, right, at 10.8 world. We then talked about a lot of the benefits you receive from the connected and disconnected, the field mobility, this being able to leverage the new ArcGIS field maps when it gets released here soon will be a big bonus for folks implementing the UN. That cross-platform integration, the whole modernized architecture. Again, the ability to have access through a REST endpoint really opens up a lot of opportunities for us to push out information to many different clients. Right? That's why Esri can say, I can support a tablet, I can support a laptop, I can support a disconnected editing, I can support web applications, because it's all coming through a REST endpoint. And this really opens up an opportunity for doing and moving to the cloud, putting ArcGIS Enterprise and the utility network in sort of a cloud environment, so allow us to modernize our infrastructure in that respect and take advantage of cloud capabilities for scalability, elasticity, and uptime and high availability and things like that, especially when we're dealing with remote workforces, having to work from home, things like that. We talked a lot about the improved asset representations, and this is literally the future of all utility network management capabilities that Esri's introducing to us. And then we talked about sort of the steps that we follow internally to get you to that end result, from a readiness assessment all the way down to including the education and outreach throughout the whole process there. So let me kind of walk through a couple of questions you might want to ask yourself before you get started. First off, do I have ArcGIS Enterprise? What version do I have? And what does that version give me access to, right? Because Esri is constantly improving the schema, the tools, the applications, and the connectivity. So identify what version of ArcGIS Enterprise you have now. Remember that it is a service-based architecture. They do have this sort of entry-level approach with that hosted service idea there, with file G database support from a single user standpoint. So you can get started at a minimal footprint and minimal effort there. Do I have a standardized data model? So think about your service area, right? Because this is really going to affect the migration strategy. The number of customers and connections and your size of your systems, and how many systems do you have? You have water, sewer, storm, and others, right? How will that affect that whole process? And do I need to do I do all of them at once, or do I kind of take one at a time, right? And kind of evolve those throughout the process there. Do I use ArcGIS Pro? This is probably one of the first things we ask anybody when we start talking about adopting the UN is how proficient are you with ArcGIS Pro? This is a must, right? We can't get around it. This is a must. We got to have this in place, and we need to get people trained up and ready to go. Do I have any other third-party tools leveraging my existing UN network or non-UN network, right? Any asset management systems, any billing, SCADA, CCTV, anything else that might break or I might need to reintegrate with or repoint to new services based on this change. And do you need help, right? This is where we at GISinc can come into play. We've been around for a long time, almost 30 years now, with 130 passionate professionals that are wake up every day trying to help our customers leverage the most out of their GIS. And what's real important here, I think, no matter who you get help from, is make sure they have that utility network specialty designation that Esri requires its business partners to have to help reinsure you that we have folks that are ready, but also Esri can help guide and direct our efforts as well. And being a platinum business partner with Esri and CityWorks helps us have that much tighter integration with those different components, especially if you use those within your organization. So I just want to thank you all so much for listening to me. And if you have any questions, just email me, steve.mulberry@GISinc.com, or Tyler, Prahl. Reach out to either one of us for questions. And yeah, let's have, if there's any time for some questions.
All right, Steve, it looks like we have a couple questions. The first one is, does ArcGIS Pro really run from a browser?
Yes, it does. And if you want me to show it to you, I'd love to. So we use it inside of the app streaming technology within Amazon Web Services. So if you just look up app streaming, you can actually run ArcGIS Pro in a web browser and connect to your services. So yes.
All right. And then the second question is, we have a working electric network in desktop, not enterprise. Any thoughts as we move to Pro? Will it come seamlessly into Pro?
Okay, so there will definitely be a change, right? Seamlessly is a big word here. So you will definitely have to have some changes, some workflow changes, some getting used to the whole new interface, the whole new schema. There will be changes, but migrating from any system into the new utility network system is a process. There is not an easy button, right? There's just not an easy button. I can say click and it goes from one thing to another. So you got to work through the steps. You got to take your time, and just know that those tools that I mentioned out there, the data reviewer tools, the data loading tools that Esri provides, the GISinc tools, there's some scripts that we've written. All these things come together and play very nicely in this process when you move things over.
You actually have till 3:30, so if you wanted to show the Pro from the browser, you would have time.
Oh, I love the challenge here. All right, let's see here. Let me bring up my browser. And let's see if we can't get this going here. So actually, I'm just gonna do this on the fly. Do you know how to erase that circle on the screen
I think
there?
it's like a clear in your Zoom settings.
Okay, let me see if I can find that.
It's like clear all annotations. I can't see the option because I cannot share my screen.
Yeah, at the top of the screen, Steve, at the banner level, where
Got it. Well, I said clear annotations. Oh, there we go. Clear all drawing. There we go. All right. So you notice that when I started up, and I'm going to have to bring up another window here to get my password. So I started up AppStream. So here I am in a browser. I started up AppStream and it immediately showed, whoops, let me go back to, how do I get off of annotate? There we go. And so now it started up, and within this particular configuration, I set up two applications that I want to run inside of AppStream. One of those is Excel, one of those ArcGIS Pro. So when I do this for the very first time, so this is the first time I come in for the day, it's actually spinning up the instance that I've configured. And so maybe that day I needed to have some extra RAM, some more CPU, or some GPU, whatever I wanted to do to fire up ArcGIS Pro. Right, it's going to spin up that instance for me, and then keep that instance on for me for the entire duration of my session. And what's really nice about this kind of service is that I can set up notifications, and I can set up restraints inside from a management perspective. So maybe all instances shut down at 9 o'clock at night, and then all of them automatically boot up at 7 in the morning, so that when folks come in to the office, they're ready to go, and I don't have to wait for this instance to spin up. Or maybe I want to monitor the disk usage or whatever it might be, right? So you have full control over this particular service. Now, Amazon has sort of 3 ways you can do this. AppStream is one of them, virtual workspace is another, or just a virtual machine. Microsoft has a couple ways. They have a virtual workspace, and they also have just virtual machines that you can actually just configure and install and run either ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro or things like that. So you kind of see this would be the actual experience someone would have if I came in for the very first day and started up it's like booting up my computer for the very first time, getting things loaded and running there. So here it is resizing. And what's nice is I can have multiple screens. So I can actually configure and have dual screens running in here. So now it's going to ask me to log in to ArcGIS Pro. I'm going to log in there. And now it's just going to be like Pro running from my desktop. I'm now inside of a browser, and I can see my different projects over here. I can log into any one of those. It actually popped up and said, hey, you got a new version. Do you want to install it? Now, as an end user, I'm not the administrator of this. So as an administrator, I'd have to go in there and upgrade to the latest version so that this user would have access to that. I'm just going to open up a project here, but you can see I could open up and start a new project, add different data sets in here. Here, this is one I use a lot for doing a lot of COVID data processing inside of ArcGIS Pro. I got a pretty big model here that you'll see load. But up here on top, you'll notice a few buttons inside the browser here. So I've got my applications, and I can execute Pro, or I can actually execute Excel too. So I can actually load Excel in the same window, and I can jump back and forth between the two. So now I have Excel running, I have Pro running inside there. And I can actually execute this multiple times. So I can minimize the different systems here. Let me go back here, minimize. Now I've got several applications running. I have 2 Pro running right now, and I have an Excel running. And I can switch between windows. I can upload my files. I can copy and paste. I can set up different characteristics, performance. I can do multiple screens if I set that up. But here I am inside of my application, my map, and I can just use it. Now, based on the instance that I have here and the type of data that I'm working with, it could be, it all depends on how much information that I'm working with and streaming and doing, and how many GPUs that I configured. But this is ArcGIS Pro running inside of a browser.
Very cool.
What else?
Steve, there was a question about what is field maps? What is Esri's new offering in field maps? And I know what in a few minutes, what could we say about that?
Real quick. So Esri introduced ArcGIS field maps at the last Dev Summit and User Conference this year. And what they're doing is Esri's realized that they created these really nice independent applications like Collector and Explorer and Navigator and all these different applications. And those are nice, and they work very well standalone, but we as end users need one application. So they're actually integrating all these independent applications into one thing called ArcGIS Field Maps, and then based on my username, I get access to the functionality that's associated with my username. So if I just need to explore maps, right? I'm a viewer. I can download the mobile application on my smart device, and when I log in, I get all the viewing capabilities, everything that ArcGIS Explorer had. If I'm a collector, well, now I get everything that Collector had. If I needed to do routing and navigation, well, that's going to be embedded. So Esri's going to start embedding a thing, Explorer, Collector, Navigator, a Workforce, and there's one more. There's 5 of them. There's 5 field applications that are going to be merged into one field. It's going to be really nice for us, so we don't have to worry about deploying 5 applications to a smartphone. You get one, and based on your username and your identity, you get access to that specific capabilities. It's going to be a modernized application. It's going to allow me to tie nicely into indoors and outdoor capability, into the UN network, into this branch versioning, offline maps. All these new capabilities are going to be part of that new ArcGIS Field Maps. And the first release should be out this quarter. Yes, I love that. Sweet. This game is a game changer, being able to run Pro in a web browser. One word of caution.
Turn it off.
just because you can, right? Make sure you take the time to architect out this solution. Because for me, and having a budget, my instance here is really small. It's 2 cores, maybe 8 gig of RAM, something like that. So it may not perform as best as others, but you can see as I'm zooming in and zooming out, it behaves pretty well, right? I can identify, I can do things, I can turn stuff on and off. All that stuff works really nicely. But if you're doing 3D or image processing or those things, you want to make sure you configure that instance to handle that workload. But yes, this is a game changer. And in fact, one of our utility networks, when COVID hit, they sent all their employees home. They couldn't get onto their VPN to access ArcGIS Pro. So we very quickly stood up ArcGIS Pro in AppStream for them. And they were able to access their services because it's a REST endpoint. They access their network right from the environment. So they had 2 different infrastructures going in at the same time. Pretty cool. Let me see if I have access to the other question there. I know we're almost done. Let me go back to my projects. Where are my projects? So I think I have a utility network. How do I, oh, here we go. Let's go to Opelika. This is one of our customers here. Nope. I gotta find, I know they're gonna, I need a password to access this one. Give me 1 second to find that. Like having to type in your password while everybody's watching. Okay, so this is access. So what's neat about this, so this is running, so imagine this is ArcGIS Pro running an Amazon Web Services through AppStream, and I'm going to be hitting a water utility network that's actually running in a different cloud provider infrastructure through REST endpoints. So 2 totally different infrastructures, platforms, but they're coming together nicely here in one environment. So this is their water. You can see their water devices, junctions, assemblies, and things like that. I'm bringing in the base map coming from ArcGIS Online. If I could identify a feature out here to bring it up. I think I have a couple bookmarks. Let's see how fast things kind of work. Let's go over to my apartments. So you can see that kind of jumps up there pretty quickly, right? I can zoom in, identify a feature. So, here we're working with that information. What else? What else?
Covered a lot of ground.
Yes, and so yes, all it does is adds another tab up here. This is where you start to work with all of your utility tools, network tools for doing your edits and things like that.
Okay, are there any other questions out there, guys? If not, I'd like to thank Tyler and Steve